in the glittering world of the ultra-rich appearances, are everything. A world of private jets, 9-figure deals, and charity galas where the cost of the champagne could fund a small village for a year. In this world, Jasper Drake was a king, a self-made tech billionaire who had everything he ever wanted. And by his side was his wife, Grace, elegant, quiet, and in his eyes, increasingly plain. He saw her as a comfortable accessory, a relic of a past he had outgrown. But he forgot one crucial rule of the elite. The most dangerous players are the ones who never need to show their cards. What happens when the woman you dismiss is the one holding the entire deck? This is the story of a public humiliation that sparked a private war, and a wife who reminded her husband and the world that true power isn't worn on your sleeve, it's woven into the very fabric of your soul. The air in the back of the Rolls-Royce Cullinan was thick with an expensive, suffocating silence. It smelled of Italian leather and Grace's subtle gardenia-scented perfume, a fragrance Jasper Drake had once claimed to love. Now he didn't seem to notice it at all. His face, illuminated by the cold blue light of his phone, was a mask of chiseled indifference. He scrolled through stock market data, his thumb moving with a relentless, sharp efficiency that defined his entire existence. Grace smoothed a hand over the fabric of her dress. It was a deep, sapphire blue silk, a classic A-line, cut by a lesser-known but brilliant designer. She admired Carolina Herrera. It was understated, elegant, and timeless. It was in every way her. "Do you think the blue is too understated for the Starlight Gala?" she asked, her voice soft, a gentle probe into the fortress of his concentration. Jasper didn't look up. "It's fine, Jenin. It's a dress." "It's for the Children's Hospital fundraiser," she added, a hint of hope in her voice. "I thought something classic would be more appropriate than flashy." He finally lowered his phone, his grey eyes sweeping over her in a clinical, 1-second appraisal. It wasn't the look of a husband admiring his wife. It was the look of an investor assessing an asset that was underperforming. "Flashy is the point," he said, his tone flat. "People don't donate $100,000 at a charity auction because you look appropriate. They do it because they're caught up in the spectacle, the glamour. You look like you're heading to a parent-teacher conference, not the year's biggest philanthropic event." The words were like tiny shards of glass, and though she was used to them, they still found a way to cut. For 5 years, Grace had tried to be the perfect wife for the man he was becoming. She'd hosted his soulless dinner parties, smiled at his crass business partners, and tolerated the endless parade of ambitious sycophants who orbited him. She had muted her own colors, hoping to fit into the sleek monochrome world he was building. I don't feel comfortable in those skin-tight sequined things everyone wears," she confessed quietly. "It's not about comfort, Grace. It's about image." He sighed, turning back to his phone, as if the conversation was already a waste of his valuable time. "Our image." The unspoken word hung in the air. "My image." The car glided to a stop before the grand entrance of the museum, and the world outside erupted into a frenzy of flashing lights and muted shouts. The Starlight Foundation Gala was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. As they stepped onto the red carpet, the cameras descended like hungry locusts. Jasper was in his element. He smiled, a perfectly calibrated display of power and charm. He placed a hand on the small of Grace's back, a proprietary gesture that was more for the cameras than for her. She smiled too, a practiced, gentle curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. Inside the grand hall was a breathtaking sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Diamonds dripped from necks and wrists, and the air buzzed with the low hum of immense wealth. Jasper immediately released her, his eyes scanning the crowd for opportunities for connections, for anyone more important than the woman standing next to him. Within minutes, he was absorbed into a circle of private equity magnates, leaving Grace to drift alone. She was accustomed to this. She would find the other philanthropic wives discuss the charity, admire the art, and count the minutes until she could retreat back into the quiet solitude of her library at home. But tonight felt different. A sense of dread coiled in her stomach. It wasn't long before she saw why. Sauntering through the crowd like a panther in red sequins was Crystal Jennings. Crystal was an Instagram model turned brand ambassador, a woman whose entire career was built on being seen. Her dress was a sliver of crimson fabric that left little to the imagination. Her lips were plumped to a caricature of a pout, and her laughter was loud and brassy, designed to draw attention. And its primary target was Jasper. Grace watched from across the room as Crystal draped herself over Jasper's arm. He didn't pull away. He laughed at her jokes, his head tilted towards hers, their bodies closer than was appropriate for a married man and a single woman in such a public forum. A familiar ache bloomed in Grace's chest, a dull, weary pain she had learned to live with. She turned away, making her way towards a quieter alcove near a collection of impressionist paintings. She was pretending to study a Monet when a voice, dripping with saccharine condescension, sliced through her thoughts. "Grace, darling, I almost didn't recognize you." Crystal Jennings stood before her, a champagne flute in one hand, her eyes doing a slow, insulting crawl from Grace's simple pearl earrings down to her sensible satin pumps. "Crystal," Grace said, her voice even. "Enjoying the evening?" "Immensely." Crystal purred, taking a deliberate step closer. "Though I must say, you're brave." "Brave?" Grace asked, bracing herself. "To wear that," Crystal said, gesturing vaguely at Grace's dress with her flute. "In a room full of Balenciaga and Versace, you went with, what is that, Talbot's? It's very down to earth. Did you get lost on your way to the library fundraiser?" A few people nearby glanced over their conversations, faltering. Crystal's voice was pitched just loud enough to be overheard. This was a performance. Grace's cheeks burned. "It's Carolina Herrera," she stated, keeping her chin high. Crystal let out a tinkling, cruel laugh. "Oh, honey, of course it is. But it looks like something one finds in a high-end consignment shop. You know, for the divorced wives of dentists. Jasper is such a titan, a real predator in the business world. You'd think he'd want a lioness by his side, not a house cat." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over Grace. Her eyes flickered across the room, searching for her husband. He was watching. He saw the whole exchange, the smirk on Crystal's face, the shocked pity on the faces of onlookers. And he did nothing. He just stood there, a glass in his hand, a passive observer to his own wife's vivisection. That was the moment something inside Grace, something that had been slowly cracking for years, finally shattered. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a tight whisper. She turned, walking past Crystal without another word. She didn't run. Her movements were deliberate, dignified. She walked straight towards the exit, past the marble statues and the whispering guests. She didn't look back at her husband, who was now frowning in Crystal's direction, not with anger at the mistress, but with annoyance at the wife who was creating a scene by leaving. As the doorman hailed her a taxi, she couldn't bear the thought of waiting for the rolls. The cool night air hit her face. The tears she had refused to shed in front of them finally came hot and silent. It wasn't about the dress. It was never about the dress. It was about the utter soul-crushing invisibility. The realization that she wasn't a partner in her husband's life. She was a placeholder, and a poorly dressed one at that. In the back of the yellow cab, speeding away from the museum's glittering facade, she wiped her tears with a sudden, fierce resolve. The house cat was done. The lioness was about to be woken. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't call her mother or her best friend. She scrolled deep into her contacts to a name she hadn't dialed in over 6 years, a number in Paris. The phone rang twice before a deep, heavily accented voice answered. "Allô? Antoine." Grace said, her voice trembling but gaining strength with each word. "It's General Grace Devereaux." She hadn't used her maiden name in years, saying it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had locked away. There was a pause on the other end, then a warm, booming laugh of recognition. "Chère Grace, my little nightingale, I thought you had vanished from the earth, married to that American computer boy. To what do I owe this pleasure after so long?" "I need your help," Grace said, the city lights blurring past the window. "I need more than help. I need an artist. I need a miracle. And I need a war." Antoine Dubois, the legendary head of the eponymous Couture house, chuckled again, a low, intrigued rumble. "Ma chérie," he said, his voice alive with sudden interest. "For you I will build an army." The flight to Paris was an act of rebellion. Grace didn't tell Jasper. She left a simple 2-line note on the cold marble of the kitchen island. "I've gone to visit family. I will be back in a few days." She packed a single suitcase, leaving behind the carefully curated wardrobe of Mrs. Drake and taking only the essentials. The private jet that whisked her across the Atlantic wasn't one of Jasper's. It was a Gulfstream G650 that belonged to the Devereaux Foundation, summoned with a single discreet text message. Jasper's response was a perfunctory text, hours later. "Fine, let me know when you're back." He didn't ask which family. He didn't ask if she was okay. He likely felt relieved to have her out of the way. It would give him unfettered time with Crystal. The thought, which once would have sent a spear of jealousy through her heart, now merely fueled the cold fire of her resolve. Paris was not just a city to Grace. It was a homecoming. She wasn't Grace Drake, the tech billionaire's quiet wife here. She was Grace Devereaux, the only daughter of Jean-Luc and Isabelle Devereaux, a family whose name was whispered with reverence in the worlds of art finance and haute couture. The Devereaux fortune wasn't new and flashy like Jasper's. It was an ancient, sprawling empire built over centuries, rooted in banking vineyards in Bordeaux, and a portfolio of impressionist art that could rival the Musée d'Orsay. She had walked away from it all for Jasper. She had met him during her graduate studies at Columbia, a brilliant, hungry and charming disruptor who saw her as Grace, the art history student, not Grace, the heiress. She'd fallen in love with the idea of being loved for herself, not her name. She had deliberately hidden the scale of her family's wealth, wanting to build a life on their own terms. But over time, as his star ascended, his hunger had turned into a different kind of appetite, one for status, for recognition, for the very world she had tried to escape. And in his eyes, she had become a relic of his humbler past, not the key to a future he couldn't even comprehend. The Atelier Dubois was tucked away on a quiet street off the Place Vendôme, its entrance so discreet you could walk past it a dozen times and never know that inside magic was being spun from thread and silk. Antoine Dubois greeted her at the door himself. He was a man in his late 70s with a shock of white hair, round spectacles, and an energy that could exhaust a man half his age. He embraced her in a hug that smelled of expensive cologne and creativity. "My nightingale," he boomed, holding her at arm's length. "Look at you. The sadness in your eyes is a crime against beauty. We will fix this. Come tell Uncle Antoine everything." over cups of impossibly strong espresso in his private salon, surrounded by sketches and bolts of exquisite fabric, Grace told him. She didn't cry. She recounted the gala, the mockery of her dress, Crystal's cruel words, and the profound, crushing indifference in her husband's eyes. She spoke of the years of being made to feel small, plain, and inadequate. Antoine listened, his expression growing stormier with each word. "This boy," he finally said, his voice a low growl. "This vendeur d'ordinateurs. He takes a swan and tries to convince her she is a pigeon. He doesn't see you, Grace. He sees a brand. And you are not a brand. You are a masterpiece." He stood up, pacing the room with renewed vigor. "So, we do not just make a dress. A dress is a bandage for a wound. We are not interested in bandages. We are interested in armor. We will remind this world and this little husband of yours exactly who a Devereux is." The next 3 days were a whirlwind. This was not a shopping trip. It was the strategic assembly of an arsenal. Antoine didn't take her to boutiques. He took her into the archives, the hallowed, climate-controlled vaults beneath his atelier, where pieces of fashion history were preserved. "Anyone with a black card can buy the latest season's Versace," he explained, running a reverent hand over a garment bag. "It is meaningless. It is loud, but it has nothing to say. A Devereux does not shout. She speaks, and the world leans in to listen." He unveiled his plan. Jasper had a major event in 10 days, the Drake Innovations Future Gala, a lavish affair to unveil his company's new satellite technology. It would be the biggest night of his career, with international media tech moguls and government investors in attendance. "This is our stage," Antoine declared. "You will not arrive with him. You will arrive separately. You will not be his wife. You will be an event in your own right." The centerpiece was the dress. Antoine had selected a piece from his own 1996 archival collection, a gown that had only ever been worn once on the runway. It was nicknamed the Starfall. It was not a dress of sequins and cutouts. It was a column of midnight blue silk velvet, so dark it was almost black. The fabric was specially woven to absorb light, creating an effect of infinite depth, and cascading down one shoulder across the bodice and pooling at the floor was an intricate hand-stitched embroidery of platinum thread and antique diamonds laid out to perfectly replicate the Cygnus constellation. It was a dress that didn't scream for attention. It commanded it with the silent, overwhelming power of the night sky. "But the dress is only the beginning," Antoine said, his eyes gleaming. He made another call. An hour later, a severe-looking woman with a leather briefcase arrived. She was from Cartier, from their high jewelry division, a department that served clients, so exclusive it didn't even have a public name. She opened the case on a velvet tray. Inside lay the Saphir du Ciel, the sky sapphire. It was a legendary 120-carat cornflower blue sapphire of Ceylonese origin, surrounded by a constellation of its own diamonds. It hadn't been seen in public for 50 years. It was part of the Devereux private collection, on loan to Cartier for museum exhibitions. It was Grace's birthright. She had never once worn a piece from the family vault, believing it to be too ostentatious. Now she looked at it not as a piece of jewelry, but as a weapon. The final pieces fell into place. Antoine styled her entire look, from the custom-made velvet heels by René Cauvilla to the simple, elegant chignon that would let the gown and the necklace do their work. He coached her. "Walk slowly," he instructed as she practiced in the grand salon. "Let them look. Do not smile for them. A slight, enigmatic curve of the lips, nothing more. You are not there to please them. You are there to be witnessed. Your husband wants a spectacle. We will give him a masterpiece of art and history. Let his little plastic girlfriend compete with that. On the fourth day, Grace felt a shift within herself. Standing before the mirror in Antoine's salon, draped in history and power, she didn't see the quiet, accommodating wife she had been. She saw the granddaughter of Isabel Devereux, a woman who had faced down presidents and titans of industry with nothing more than a cool smile and an iron will. She felt the weight of her legacy not as a burden, but as a mantle of strength. She sent one final carefully worded email, not to her husband, but to a name high on the guest list of the future gala, Marco Baldini, the editor-in-chief of Vogue Europe. She and Marco's families had summered together in the south of France for decades. The email read, "Marco, I know it's last minute, but I'll be attending the Drake Innovations Gala. I'll be wearing something from Antoine's archives. I thought you might find it photographically interesting. All my best, Jen Devereux." The response came in under a minute. "Gigi, the world has missed you. Consider my entire photo team at your disposal. This will be the cover, not of the society pages, of the September issue. Welcome back." Monsieur Grace smiled. The pieces were set. The stage was waiting. Jasper was about to unveil his future, but he had no idea he was about to be eclipsed by a past he never even knew existed. The night of the Drake Innovations Future Gala was a symphony of orchestrated chaos. The venue was a marvel of modern architecture, a newly constructed glass pavilion overlooking the city skyline. Searchlights sliced through the night sky, painting the clouds with the PI logo. The red carpet was even more frantic than the one at the Starlight Gala. This was not society. This was power. Tech journalists from every major outlet, camera crews from global news networks, and an army of photographers were all there to capture the arrival of the titans of the digital age. Jasper Drake arrived early, basking in the glow. He was the sun around which this entire universe revolved. By his side, in a shimmering molten gold dress that clung to every curve, was Crystal Jennings. Her presence was a bold public statement. Jasper hadn't even had the decency to call Grace in Paris to ask when she was returning to even pretend to want her there. He had simply replaced her, assuming she would retreat quietly, as she always did. He held Crystal's hand, smiling for the cameras, presenting her as his dazzling consort. Crystal was preening. "Isn't Jasper just a genius?" she gushed to a reporter from TechCrunch. "He's literally changing the world tonight. It's so inspiring to be with a man who is at the absolute peak of his game." Inside the pavilion was buzzing. Jasper worked the room, Crystal a glittering limpet on his arm, accepting congratulations, shaking hands with venture capitalists, and explaining his vision for the future to a senator. He felt invincible. Tonight was his coronation. At precisely 8:30 p.m., a ripple of confusion started at the entrance. The frenzied energy of the press pit, which had begun to die down, suddenly reignited with a ferocity that made Jasper turn his head. A car was pulling up, but it wasn't a company Tesla or a sleek Maybach. It was a vintage 1961 Rolls-Royce Phantom Fish, a car of quiet, regal authority. It was a car that didn't belong in the world of disruptive tech and fast money. It belonged to another era, another class of wealth altogether. The doorman, a man accustomed to seeing celebrities and billionaires every day, seemed to stand a little straighter as he opened the passenger door. A single velvet-clad heel touched the pavement. A collective gasp went through the press line. The camera flashes, which had been sporadic, erupted into a solid, blinding wall of light. It was a reception reserved for royalty or Hollywood legends. Jasper frowned, squinting towards the entrance. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered to the investor he was talking to. Crystal craned her neck. Probably some ancient Hollywood actress trying to stay relevant. She scoffed, a flicker of annoyance on her face that someone was stealing her spotlight. Then the woman stepped out. She moved with an unhurried liquid grace. The dress of midnight velvet seemed to drink the frantic light of the cameras, making her the calm, dark center of a chaotic universe. The platinum and diamond constellation embroidered on the gown caught the flashes and threw them back not as a gaudy sparkle, but as the cool, distant shimmer of actual stars. Around her neck, the sapphire du ciel rested against her collarbone, a mesmerizing pool of deep celestial blue, a stone so magnificent it seemed to possess its own gravitational pull. Her hair was swept back, her face serene and sculpted. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was one of calm, almost regal detachment. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight ahead, as if the entire screaming mob of photographers was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The whispers started rippling through the crowd, spreading from the red carpet into the pavilion. "Is that a vintage Dubois? My God, look at the necklace. Is that? It can't be. The Devereux sapphire. Who is she? Wait, is that Drake's wife?" Jasper heard the whispers. He saw the woman, but his brain couldn't connect the two. The woman at the door was an apparition of elegance and power. She was art. She was history. She was everything his world of cold, hard code and aggressive growth was not. His wife was the woman in the sensible blue dress, the quiet, mousy woman who arranged flowers and managed their social calendar. And then she turned her head slightly, and the light caught her profile. And Jasper Drake froze. His champagne glass, halfway to his lips, stopped. The blood drained from his face. The air left his lungs in a silent whoosh. The chattering senator beside him, the hum of the crowd, the entire multi-million-dollar event he had orchestrated it all, faded into a muffled, distant roar. It was Grace. His Grace. But it wasn't. This woman carried herself with an authority he had never seen. The quiet uncertainty was gone, replaced by a formidable stillness. The gentle deference in her eyes had been supplanted by an unreadable, intelligent calm. She wasn't looking for his approval. She didn't even seem to be aware of his existence. Marco Baldini, the editor of Vogue Europe, suddenly appeared by her side, kissing her on both cheeks. "Gigi, you are a vision," he murmured loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The world is not ready." He personally escorted her through the entrance, parting the sea of stunned onlookers. Crystal's jaw was literally hanging open. Her molten gold dress, which had seemed so glamorous moments before, now looked cheap and garish next to the timeless masterpiece Grace was wearing. Her own professionally applied confidence evaporated, replaced by a raw, ugly shock. That's your wife," she stammered, her voice a strangled squeak. "What is she wearing? Where did she get the—" Jasper couldn't answer. He was paralyzed, a statue in a bespoke suit. His mind was racing, trying to process the impossible data before him. The dress, the necklace, the car. The way Marco Baldini, a man who had snubbed him for a cover story 3 times, was fawning over her. None of it computed. He had built his empire on understanding systems, on predicting outcomes. This was a variable he had never even conceived of. Grace glided into the pavilion. She didn't look for him. Her eyes scanned the room with a cool, appraising gaze. She saw a group of people standing near a large, abstract painting, the elderly matriarch of a European banking family, a Japanese tech investor, known for his legendary art collection, and the French cultural attaché. They were the true power in the room, the old money elites Jasper had been trying to impress for years, with little success. And then the most baffling thing happened. As Grace approached them, their faces lit up with genuine warmth and recognition. "Grâce, ma chérie," the French attaché exclaimed, taking her hands. "It has been too long. You look just like your mother did at the Élysée Palace in '98. The Japanese investor bowed his head slightly. Mrs. Drake, or should I say, Mademoiselle Devereux. The sapphire is even more breathtaking in person. An honor to finally see it. Jasper watched, rooted to the spot, as his wife, the woman he had deemed too plain, too boring, too appropriate, was welcomed into the inner sanctum of a world he could only press his face against the glass of. They weren't talking to her as Jasper Drake's wife. They were talking to her as one of their own. He felt a cold dread, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his company was on the verge of bankruptcy years ago. It was the feeling of being completely and utterly out of his depth. The foundation of his world, his carefully constructed hierarchy, where he sat at the top, had just been fractured by a woman he thought he owned, arriving in a dress and a history he couldn't possibly afford. The cameras were still flashing, but for the first time that night, none of them were pointed at him. The chill that had frozen Jasper in place began to spread through his veins. He was a man who commanded rooms, who dominated negotiations, who controlled every variable. Now he was a ghost at his own celebration, watching a narrative unfold that he had no part in writing. Grace was a celestial body that had entered his orbit and thrown everything off its axis. She moved through the party with an effortless grace, a queen holding court. She didn't rush. She didn't seek anyone out. Instead, people came to her. A quiet word here, a shared laugh there. She spoke fluent French. With the attaché discussed the nuances of the Japanese Edo period with the investor, and debated the merits of a philanthropic initiative with the banking matriarch. She was not just participating in their world, she was a pillar of it. Crystal, recovering from her initial shock, was now vibrating with a toxic mix of jealousy and confusion. "Go talk to her," she hissed at Jasper, digging her painted nails into his arm. "What is going on? This is your night. She's ruining it." Jasper flinched, pulling his arm away. For the first time, Crystal's voice grated on him. Her gilded glamour, which he had found so intoxicating, now seemed shrill and one-dimensional. She was complaining about a ruined party while he was witnessing the complete implosion of his perceived reality. He finally moved his legs, feeling like lead. He started towards Grace, his mind a frantic jumble of questions. As he approached, he saw Crystal, unable to restrain herself, break away and stride toward Grace first. It was a disastrous miscalculation. Crystal intercepted Grace as she was concluding a conversation. Well, Crystal began, her tone dripping with forced nonchalance. "Quite the entrance. You finally decided to raid your grandmother's closet." Grace turned slowly. She didn't offer a retort. She simply looked at Crystal. Her gaze was not angry or hurt. It was something far more devastating. It was dismissive. She looked at Crystal Jennings the way a geologist might look at a common pebble, with a brief clinical assessment of its unremarkable nature, before turning her attention back to something of value. She held Crystal's gaze for a single, silent beat, then turned back to the cultural attaché. "As I was saying, Etienne," she continued, her voice calm and clear, "the Foundation is prepared to underwrite the entire Louvre restoration project for the Napoleonic wing." The dismissal was so total, so profound, that it was more effective than any insult. Crystal was left standing there, her mouth slightly agape, rendered utterly irrelevant. She had tried to start a fight with fists, only to find her opponent was waging a war with capital and culture. Humiliated, she flushed a deep red and scurried back to the bar. Now it was Jasper's turn. He managed to get Grace alone for a moment near the towering glass wall overlooking the city. "Jen," he said, his voice strained. "What is this? What are you wearing? That necklace?" "It's a dress, Jasper," she replied, her voice cool and even echoing his own dismissive words from the car ride to the Starlight Gala. "And a family heirloom." "Family heirloom. Your father was a history professor, and your mother a librarian," he said, bewildered. It was the story she had told him, a simplified version of the truth. Her father was a professor, but of economic history at the Sorbonne, and he sat on the board of the World Bank. Her mother was a librarian, but she was the chief acquisitions librarian for the Devereux Art Foundation. Grace allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. "I never lied to you, Jasper. I just allowed you to believe the version of my life that you were comfortable with. You never asked for more." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. He had never been curious about her past beyond the superficial. He had seen what he wanted to see, a smart, pretty, uncomplicated woman from a respectable but unremarkable background, someone who wouldn't overshadow him. "The Devereux Foundation," he asked, the name finally clicking in his head from the conversation he'd overheard. "The one that's a silent partner in half the tech startups in Silicon Valley, the one everyone calls the Kingmaker Fund. My grandfather started it," she said simply, as if discussing the weather. "I'm on the acquisitions board." Jasper felt the floor drop out from under him. He had spent the last 2 years desperately trying to get a meeting with the Devereux Foundation to secure their investment for his next phase of expansion. He had been courting their junior partners, wining and dining, their analysts completely unaware that the key to the entire kingdom was sleeping in his bed every night, a key he had dismissed as a decorative trinket. But the final, most devastating twist was yet to come. The centerpiece of the evening was a private auction to fund a STEM education initiative, a pet project of Jasper's. The highlight was the sale of a small, obscure tech patent he owned, which he was donating to kickstart the bidding. The real purpose, however, was to attract a specific buyer. For months, the tech and art worlds had been buzzing about a mysterious, anonymous collector, known only by the pseudonym Ariadne. Ariadne was known for making bold, unexpected acquisitions, buying up everything from rare earth mineral rights to contemporary art, to most recently pivotal tech patents. Ariadne's involvement would lend his event an incredible level of prestige. He had secretly invited a representative hoping Ariadne would bid. The auctioneer took the stage. "We will now begin the bidding for the Drake Continuum patent," he announced. "A revolutionary piece of data compression technology. We will open the bidding at $1 million. The room was quiet. 1 million was a steep opening. "Do I have 1 million? The auctioneer asked. A hand went up in the back. A man in a simple grey suit. 1 million from the representative of Ariadne. The auctioneer confirmed a buzz going through the crowd. An executive from a rival company bid 2 million. Ariadne's rep bid 5. The rival bid 6. Ariadne's rep instantly countered. 10 million! The room gasped. Jasper's heart pounded. This was exactly what he wanted. A bidding war driven by the mystique of Ariadne would make his patent, and by extension, him legendary. The rival executive, looking flustered, conferred with his team and reluctantly shook his head. $10 million, the auctioneer said, his voice booming. Going once, going twice. Before he could say, sold saw, Grace, who had been standing silently beside Jasper, spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence of the massive room with absolute clarity. 20 million, she said. The entire pavilion went dead silent. Every single head turned towards her. The auctioneer stared his gavel, frozen in mid-air. Jasper looked at her, as if she had just sprouted wings. "Jen, what are you doing?" he whispered frantically. "This is a charity auction. That's my patent." Grace didn't look at him. She looked at Ariadne's representative in the back, who was staring at her with wide-eyed shock, before a slow smile of understanding spread across his face. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod and lowered his hand, officially withdrawing from the bidding. I have a bid of $20 million from Mrs. Drake." The auctioneer stammered, looking at Jasper for confirmation. Jasper couldn't speak. His throat was dry. "The bid," Grace corrected him calmly, her voice resonating with quiet power, "is from Ariadne." The collective intake of breath in the room was like a vacuum. The puzzle pieces didn't just click into place, they slammed together with the force of a thunderclap. The mysterious collector, the powerhouse investor, everyone had been chasing the cultural icon maker, was Grace Devereaux Drake. "Going once," the auctioneer said, his voice trembling with excitement. "Going twice, sold for $20 million to Ariadne." The room erupted, not in applause, but in a frantic, feverish buzz of conversation. Jasper just stood there, his mind a white void. He had been trying to impress Ariadne all night, hoping to catch the eye of this powerful unseen force, while the entire time she had been standing beside him, invisible to him, in her plain blue dress. He had built this entire gala, this monument to his own success, only to discover that he was just a minor character in his own wife's far grander story. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had failed to see her at all, and in a room full of the world's most powerful people, Jasper Drake had never felt so small. The gala ended, not with a bang, but with the silent, decisive click of a vintage car door. Jasper watched the Rolls-Royce Phantom 5 pull away from the curb, its taillights receding into the city's glow until they were indistinguishable from the constellation of street lamps. The cacophony of the party he had orchestrated, the music, the chatter, the clinking glasses, faded into a dull, meaningless hum in his ears. He was adrift in the center of his own triumph, a king on a floating island, watching the continent of his reality drift away. People swirled around him, their faces flushed with champagne and excitement. A senator clapped him on the shoulder, congratulating him on a successful evening, his words about the future of technology lost in the roaring static of Jasper's thoughts. An investor shook his hand, her eyes alight with the news of Ariadne. But Jasper's grip was limp, his focus 1,000 yards away. He was a ghost at his own coronation, haunted by the living spectre of the wife he thought he knew. He went home alone, the drive in the sleek, silent Maybach, a car he usually took immense pride in, felt like a journey in a hearse. He was chauffeured back to their sprawling penthouse, a monument of glass and steel perched atop the city, designed to make him feel like a god surveying his domain. Tonight, it felt like a cage. The floor-to-ceiling windows that usually displayed his kingdom now seemed to mock him, reflecting the image of a solitary, diminished man. The space was filled with a silence that was profoundly different from its usual quiet. It was no longer the serene quiet of minimalist luxury. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of absence. On a beautifully sculpted armchair in the living room, a simple beige cashmere cardigan was draped one of Grace's, one of the boring pieces he'd subtly mocked. He walked over and touched the sleeve. The fabric was impossibly soft, still holding the faint, familiar scent of gardenia. It was a relic from a life that had existed only hours ago, a life he had carelessly dismantled. The scent, once a simple background note, now accused him. Sleep was an impossibility. He spent the night pacing the cold marble floors, his tablet in hand, as the first wave of news stories broke. The headlines were a series of brutal body blows. The Devereaux has landed philanthropic heiress, Grace Devereaux, Drake revealed as enigmatic investor, Ariadne. More than a muse. how a vintage Dubois gown and a legendary sapphire stole the show and announced a new power player, the Drake Gala's real story, not tech, but the re-emergence of a dynasty. He scrolled through photo after photo, Grace stepping from the car, a vision of midnight and stars. Grace speaking with the French cultural attaché, her expression poised and confident. Grace making her bid, her calm voice silencing a room of titans. Her Jasper Drake, the architect of the evening, was a background character, in every shot a blurred figure in a bespoke suit, his expression a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. The media had captured his exact moment of irrelevance for the entire world to see. The week that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare, waged with absolute silence. His texts, first demanding, then pleading, then apologetic, were delivered but never read. His calls rang and rang before being swallowed by the detached politeness of voicemail. He was a man who could get anyone in the world on the phone in under 5 minutes, yet he couldn't reach his own wife. He ordered his top financial analysts to dig into the Devereaux Foundation. They came back with pages of public data, their philanthropic work, their board of directors, their historical investments. But the real ledgers, the true scale of their influence, were a black box. For the first time in his professional life, Jasper was confronted with a power that could not be hacked, bought, or bullied. It was old-patient and utterly impenetrable. His world began to subtly tilt. The way his executive assistant Brenda looked at him had changed. There was a new flicker of something in her eyes, pity perhaps, or a newfound respect for the woman she had only ever known as the quiet, polite Mrs. Drake. The calls from his board members were no longer just congratulatory. They were inquisitive, laced with questions about Grace, about the Devereaux connection, questions he had no answers for. His carefully built universe had been predicated on the idea that he was its smartest, most powerful inhabitant. That illusion was now shattered. She finally came to him, a full week after the gala. She didn't come to their home, the space that held the ghost of their shared life. She came to his office, the citadel of his power. Brenda announced her arrival, not with an intercom call, but by personally knocking on his office door, her voice hushed with reverence. "Mr. Drake, your wife, is here to see you." When Grace walked in, she was not the celestial vision from the gala, nor the quiet woman in cashmere. She was a third person, one he had never seen before. Dressed in a razor-sharp navy blue suit by the row, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, she was the very picture of corporate authority. She carried a slim leather portfolio, and her movements were crisp, economical, and devoid of any sentimentality. She looked at the office, at his oversized desk, his awards, the panoramic view he was so proud of, with the cool, appraising eye of a potential buyer. He stood his heart, hammering against his ribs. "Jen," he began, his voice hoarse, "thank God, I've been so worried. We need to talk. I had no idea. And I am so sorry. For everything. For Crystal. For the way I treated you. For the things I said. For all of it." She walked toward his desk, her heels making sharp, definitive clicks on the polished concrete floor. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she let his apology hang in the air, examining it like a flawed specimen. "Let me ask you a question, Jasper," she said finally, her voice calm and devoid of the anger he had expected. The lack of it was somehow more terrifying. "Are you sorry for how you treated me, or are you sorry that you so profoundly miscalculated the value of an asset?" The question landed with surgical precision, bypassing all his prepared defenses and striking right at the heart of the ugly truth. He wanted to deny it, to profess his love, but the words felt like lies on his tongue. He had been so proud of his ability to spot value where others couldn't yet. He had lived with a masterpiece and seen only a blank canvas. "I made a mistake." He stammered the words, feeling pathetic and inadequate. "A terrible one. I let this—" He gestured helplessly around his office. "All of this blind me. I took you for granted. I love you. We can fix this." "Can we?" she asked, her tone still unnervingly level. "Do you know the name of the literacy charity I've chaired for the last 3 years? Do you know my mother's maiden name? Do you know what my thesis was about in graduate school?" She paused. "Do you even know how I take my coffee?" He opened his mouth, but no answers came. The silence was his confession. His ignorance wasn't just about her family's fortune, it was about her soul. "I thought not," she said softly. Grace reached his desk and placed 2 thick cream-colored documents on the gleaming mahogany surface, side by side. "I believe you when you say you regret your mistake. You've always been a pragmatist, quick to correct a flawed strategy. Which is why I'm here. Not to fix our marriage, but to renegotiate the terms of our partnership." He stared down at the documents. The first was instantly recognizable from its formal legal font. Divorce petition. His breath hitched. The second was bound in a dark blue cover, embossed with a simple, elegant crest he had never seen before. The Devereaux Foundation. "The foundation?" she explained, her voice, now taking on the crisp, clear tone of a CEO at a board meeting, was an anonymous seed-stage investor in the data compression algorithm that became the cornerstone of Drake Innovations. "My grandfather saw the potential in the technology. He also made a habit of installing fail-safes in his investments, especially when they involved young men with more ambition than experience. Our stake, held through a labyrinth of trusts and offshore entities, currently stands at 42%. As the newly appointed head of the Foundation's Technology Acquisitions and Oversight Committee, I am your new majority partner." Jasper collapsed into his leather chair, the air punched from his lungs. The foundation of his life, the core belief that he was a self-made man, crumbled into dust. He had never been the lone wolf, the visionary disruptor. He had been a well-managed investment, a prize stallion running in a paddock someone else had built for him. You're taking my company." He whispered the words, tasting of bile. "No," she said, and her correction was the cruelest, most brilliant part of her strategy. "Don't be ridiculous. You are an exceptional CEO, Jasper. Your drive and your vision are what grew this company into a global force. The company needs you at its helm. I am not removing you. I am simply taking my seat at the table, the one my family has been holding for me all along." She wasn't executing him. She was leashing him. She was leaving him the illusion of power, the title, the office, the public adoration, while seizing the real thing, ultimate control. He would still be king, but she would be the god he answered to. "The divorce will be quiet," she continued, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the first document. "The settlement is, as you'll see, exceedingly generous. Our marriage, however, is over. Respect isn't a commodity that can be bought back once it has been squandered. It has to be earned. And my respect is no longer included in this partnership." She turned and walked towards the door, her mission accomplished. "Grace, wait," he called out, his voice broken a desperate plea from the ruins of his world. "Why, after all this? Why?" She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, and looked back at him over her shoulder. The mask of the executive slipped for just a fraction of a second, and he saw a glimpse of the woman he had wounded. He saw the memory of the humiliation, the sting of the laughter, the coldness in his own eyes. "You and that woman, you laughed at my clothes." she said, her voice a quiet, clear bell of truth. You made me feel small and worthless over a piece of fabric. I went home that night and realized you had left me with a choice. She took a breath, the finality of her new reality settling around her like a mantle. I decided I'd rather own the whole company than ever again have to worry about what dress to wear to its party. The door clicked shut, leaving Jasper Drake alone in his glass tower. He was a billionaire, a titan of tech, a man who had everything he had ever chased. And he had just discovered he was a pauper, dethroned not by a competitor, but by the quiet, magnificent wife he had been too blind to see. Grace's story isn't just about a stunning dress or a dramatic revelation. It's a powerful reminder that our true value is never determined by someone else's opinion. It's about the strength that lies dormant within us, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It's about reclaiming your own narrative and refusing to be a minor character in your own life. We all have moments where we feel underestimated or invisible. But as Grace showed the world, the most powerful transformation doesn't happen on the outside with couture and diamonds. It happens on the inside when you finally decide to own your worth. Have you ever had a moment where you had to prove your worth to someone who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama, intrigue, and ultimate empowerment. Thank you for listening.